Hey, Tim Frisch with A Frisch Perspective here. In this video, we're going to be looking at an article titled MacArthur and DEVER, a study in contrast on COVID church precautions. This article was brought to my attention by one of the people who watch my channel. It's a bit of a challenge to MacArthur's position. It seems like the author of this article really doesn't totally agree with John MacArthur, takes issue with him, and so really sides more with DEVER's approach. So we'll look at that. Before I look at this article, though, I want to thank you all again for subscribing to the channel, for watching these videos and commenting. It is incredible to me that we are nearing 10,000 subscribers, and I wanted to announce that when I hit 10,000 subscribers, I plan to do a special Bible giveaway. So please help me get there. Keep sharing these videos. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe to this channel. Hit that bell notification so you know when I upload a new video. But thank you so much for watching and spreading the word about this channel. So let's continue to get into our Christian nerdy content here, looking at this contrast of Mark Dever and John MacArthur. Both pastors have actually sued in their situations, which is interesting. But the legal case for Mark Dever is different than John MacArthur's, what this article is pointing out, both in how he approached it and in terms of outcome as well. It says, two conservative pastors, two different approaches to protesting COVID-19 health restrictions on public gatherings with two very different outcomes. This is the story of John MacArthur and Mark Dever. Throughout the summer, MacArthur, pastor of Grace Community Church in Los Angeles, has been in a litigious battle with Los Angeles County over the county's public health restrictions against large indoor gatherings. Despite a restraining order entered against the church by a Superior Court judge, MacArthur has defiantly held indoor services with thousands of unmasked, undistanced worshipers. The county is currently seeking to have the church and its leadership held in contempt of court and fined or jailed. Almost as far away from Los Angeles as one can go in the continental U.S., DEVER has taken a different and now more successful approach with the District of Columbia government. Late on Friday, October 9th, U.S. District Judge Trevor McFadden granted relief to DEVER and Capitol Hill Baptist Church in their request to be allowed to conduct outdoor worship services in the district despite the local government ban on such assemblies. Two approaches by two pastors. The differences between the two cases and the approach of the two pastors are considerable. MacArthur has been combative and defiant from the start, and even now, while still embroiled in legal battles, he has released a video calling on other pastors across the country to open your churches. DEVER has stated his case more calmly, without making threats or inciting other churches to follow his lead. Now, to me, the bias of this article comes out in a statement like this, where it says DEVER has stated his case more calmly without making threats. I don't see MacArthur as making threats in any way. I do see him as being more on the offense in how he's handling his situation, but I think that's overstating the case here. MacArthur has seen Los Angeles County's ban on large indoor gatherings as persecution of the church and built his case on this persecution complex. DEVER has stated a unique theological conviction that biblical worship must be held in person, not via video or even in multiple services. MacArthur has refused county officials' suggestions for compromises such as holding outdoor gatherings. DEVER has sought to find a compromise with unbending government officials and has in fact been holding outdoor gatherings in nearby suburban Virginia. MacArthur's church is located in perpetually sunny Southern California, where outdoor gatherings are possible most Sundays of the year, yet refuses to yield to that format. DEVER's church is located in the less temperate climate of the Mid-Atlantic, yet has asked only to be allowed to have outdoor services. Now again, I think this is biased because even though they're saying California is very sunny, as if that's a really good thing, actually the sun in California gets very hot. I just heard someone who lives out there talking about how it's in the upper 90s, even around 100 degrees out there, even right now. So very hot out there, and he says that it's less temperate in the Mid-Atlantic, but I would rather be having church outdoor right now in the Mid-Atlantic, and certainly during the summertime. The article goes on, both pastors and their congregations have appealed to the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, legislation passed by Congress in 1993 that says government may only restrict the free exercise of religion when it has a compelling governmental interest to do so, and it must take the least restrictive means of furthering that compelling governmental interest. The Superior Court judge in California determined MacArthur and his congregation are not likely to prevail at trial, basing their claim of persecution on RFRA, in part because churches have not been singled out for treatment different than other similar assemblies, such as theaters and music performance venues, and because other viable alternatives to indoor assemblies are available. The federal district court judge in D.C. determined DEVER and his congregation are likely to prevail in their RFRA claim and therefore granted temporary relief to the church. Now, one thing this article is not pointing out is that in MacArthur's case, yes, it's true that other venues and other assemblies are restricted. However, churches have special protections under the Constitution, and so that could actually help in their case. The D.C. ruling. In D.C., DEVER made a unique case that his congregation's theological belief is that to fulfill the biblical mandate of assembling together, they must meet in person and in one service. Prior to COVID-19, Capitol Hill Baptist Church held only one Sunday morning service, did not offer a live stream, and did not employ multi-site campuses. That gave an opening for Judge McFadden to differentiate the claim of the D.C. Church against any other such cases nationwide. For its part, the district does not dispute the sincerity of the church's belief that its members must gather together in person for worship, he wrote. Rather, it maintains that the church has nonetheless failed to prove that the district's restrictions have substantially burdened the church's religious exercise, particularly where there are other methods of worship available. The district proposes that under its current restrictions, the church could hold multiple services, host a drive-in service, or broadcast the service online or over the radio, as other faith communities in the district have done. But the district misses the point. It ignores the church's sincerely held and undisputed belief about the theological importance of gathering in person as a full congregation, and that, I believe, is actually the judge saying that. Later it says, he added this, "It is for the church, not the district or this court, to define for itself the meaning of not forsaking the assembling of ourselves together. Nor should the court weigh the relative burden to the church by looking to how easily other religious groups with distinct beliefs have voluntarily changed their worship to accommodate the district's restrictions." Again, in this particular case, the district has not, as it contends, banned merely one method of worship, but instead has foreclosed the church's only method to exercise its belief in meeting together as a congregation as its faith requires. Given the district's restrictions, the church now must choose between violating the law or violating its religious convictions. This constitutes a substantial burden under RFRA. So the judge here does seem to really be siding with DEVER, and what has really bolstered DEVER's case is that the church has been very consistent in its conviction to meet together in person, and it has continued to do so outdoors in another location outside of the immediate DC area. So because of that consistent practice and the fact that they don't have online services, it does put an undue burden on them to continue to meet according to their convictions with the restrictions that DC is putting on churches. Now, I will say that MacArthur, I believe, also has a conviction that it is important for Christians to meet in person. So it might be a little unfair to delineate them so much. But you have to say DEVER has been so consistent in his practices that they don't even have online services. They just meet in person once a week for Sunday morning worship. One point of confluence between the MacArthur and DEVER cases is that both pastors and congregations cited outdoor racial justice protest as comparable to their worship services and claimed unequal treatment. So actually in both cases here we see kind of a claim of unequal treatment, discrimination against the church, which is a form of persecution. So even though earlier he said MacArthur has a persecution complex, in reality I would say both pastors are delineating a form of persecution here in their cases. In California, the judge found no similarity between the outdoor Black Lives Matter protests populated by socially distanced, masked citizens and the kind of unmasked, undistanced indoor worship MacArthur was hosting. Now, again, I think this article is biased in the way that it presents things. I want to show you some pictures of what this article says are the socially distanced masked citizens at the BLM protests in California. Here's one picture, and here's another one. And it was interesting to see what captions under these articles showing pictures said. Recent Black Lives Matter protests in New York, left, and Los Angeles, right, have not caused any spikes in coronavirus cases, a new study claims. And then another picture here. Researchers think that even if some transmission did occur at BLM protests, it was likely offset by continued social distancing measures elsewhere. Well, here's the picture of what's happening in California, and I think this is actually back in June. And notice that actually they're saying that these protests aren't going to cause a spread of the disease, and they're saying it's because of other social distancing measures. However, I mean, look at this. So it just seems like the church is being treated very differently than these large protest gatherings, and I don't think that looks like social distancing to me. So I thought the way the article framed that was definitely biased there. Back to the article, though. In the D.C. case, since DEVER and his church were asking for permission to gather outside with more than 100 people, the current D.C. limit, the judge did find some similarity between the church and protesters. No matter how the protests were organized and planned, the district's, and in particular Mayor Bowser's, support for at least some mass gatherings undermines its contention that it has a compelling interest in capping the number of attendees at the church's outdoor services, Judge McFadden wrote. The mayor's apparent encouragement of these protests also implies that the district favors some gatherings, protests, over others, religious services. Well, that again is exactly what MacArthur is saying in their case out in California. And I have said so many times that government inconsistency is going to be a major problem for the government holding up its case to limit church meetings. The article goes on further, and in complete contrast to MacArthur on the West Coast, the D.C. judge noted that Capitol Hill Baptist has consistently represented that it will take appropriate precautions, such as holding services outdoors, providing for social distancing, and requiring masks. The district has not put forward sufficient evidence showing that prohibiting a gathering with these precautions is necessary to protect the public. So that's huge. I mean, really the judge is showing there that the district is putting restrictions in a way that is not justified. So he's really siding with the church in DEVER's case. MacArthur rallies other pastors. So this is another thing that the writer of this article takes issue with. Meanwhile, in California, MacArthur released a nearly 5-minute video on Wednesday, October 7th, titled "Church is Essential." In it, he walks through Grace Community's empty building while making his case against all government authorities that try to prevent in-person worship as a means of public health protection. He compares his struggle to the Protestant Reformation. Within 4 days, the video had been viewed 540,000 times. It was tweeted out by MacArthur and others, including Franklin Graham. Today's current crop of politicians are trampling on the Constitution and on the resolve of citizens to demand their rights under the pressure of a manufactured fear, MacArthur says in the video. Then, repeating misinterpreted facts as he has done repeatedly in this battle, he adds, "The reality is that the COVID data doesn't match the government's COVID narrative. That doesn't warrant shutting down anything, especially churches, while at the same time leaving open abortion clinics, strip clubs, and marijuana dispensaries." And then, the health department is on record saying that they're going to allow riots and protests without regard for the mandated safety ordinances. Now, to some degree, what MacArthur is saying there is backed up by those pictures and the statements about those pictures that I showed earlier concerning those large protest gatherings. Going on, MacArthur's conclusion, this is obviously targeted discrimination. Leftists and secular government officials have no tolerance for biblical Christianity and are using COVID as an excuse to shut us down. We have to stand firm on the reality that the church is essential. In closing, MacArthur issues urgent advice to other pastors. Open your church. The church is essential. The video concludes with a link to a Church is Essential petition that is sponsored by the Falkirk Center, a far-right political action group housed at Liberty University in Lynchburg, Virginia. So as you can see, that article was written by someone who definitely favors DEVER's approach over MacArthur's. One comment I do want to make, I know MacArthur says things in very stark ways, but I think he is onto something in terms of what's really at play here, the underlying dynamic, and it really has to do with power. And when it comes to meeting who has power, and what we're seeing in our situation right now is the government has a lot of power and is seeking to maintain hold of that power. So I think MacArthur really gets that, and that's really what he's voicing here. It's okay for government to try to keep people safe. It's okay for government to make certain restrictions. But when it becomes a power struggle and it's really operating in ways that are unaccountable and unjustified, and it feels like it has power over something like the church, that's really a problem for Christians, or it ought to be a problem for Christians. I think that's what MacArthur is bringing out. Another comment that I want to make that really speaks into this article's approach has to do with differences of personalities. And there's no doubt that Mark Dever's personality and approach is different than John MacArthur. But I don't think it's a surprise to anybody who has known John MacArthur over the years that he's just a more assertive and even combative person in terms of how he preaches and how he conducts his ministry and how he presents his viewpoints. Now, while some people might take issue with that, something that those of us in the Protestant tradition should really think about is, what about the Reformers? What were they like? And if you think of someone like Luther versus Erasmus, do you think that MacArthur is more like Luther or Erasmus? And if we are in the Protestant tradition, it's because of someone like Luther and the fact that he was abrasive and he was willing to confront things and maybe even overstate his case at times, but to really make a strong point and help draw the church in a certain direction. Now, those of you who know me and have watched my videos probably know that MacArthur's personality is very different than mine. I'm actually a lot more like Dever in how I approach things and the way that I feel personally. But let me just say this. I actually think that in the body of Christ, it's been proven historically, as well as in our own lives, that we need different personalities and different kinds of people with different approaches to affect the church for good. And so you need people like John MacArthur, in my opinion. You need people like Mark Dever. And they each have their strengths as well as weaknesses, but God uses it because we're all part of the body and we each have a unique gifting and place in that body. Now, you may not totally agree with that, and I'm not saying that these men are totally above criticism. I do think it's right for us to examine and make sure that we're doing things in a God-honoring way. But I think it's easy to just put down people or to immediately react to them because their personalities and approaches are different. At the end of the day, I personally think there's a lot of similarity and overlap between Dever and MacArthur in terms of what they really believe. They really believe Christians should be meeting together in person, and they really believe that the government restrictions have gone overboard. Now, granted, Dever is taking a different approach. He has a different posture toward his government. But again, he's in a very different place in the country, and I do think they have some theological differences, which also plays into this. So those are just some of my thoughts about this article. I thought you'd be interested in it. I'd love to hear what you think in the comment section below, but please try to keep those comments positive and helpful to discussion. But thank you so much for listening to what I have to say from A Frisch Perspective.